Importance of faith. Open it up. Why is it open? It's working. Okay. Erev Tov. So I heard somebody ask before Mincha if we're going to have some matzah tonight. So Pesach Sheni, let's talk a little bit about Pesach Sheni. The truth is that nowadays, right, the halakha of Pesach Sheni is related to the korban. Nowadays, there's not much of an afkamina. Maybe the fact that we don't say tachanun, but what's that? Right. But let's have a look. There's something very, very interesting. If we look at the psukim, when the Torah tells us about Pesach Sheni, what it was, how it came about, why it came about, some very interesting questions that come up. Let's try and understand a little. So we mentioned it last night, but I want to just read inside the psukim with you, about 10 psukim or so, and we read through and we pay attention to what the Torah is telling us. A lot of the details of the story, maybe we can glean some insights. So this is in Parashat Ba'alotcha, which is it's Perek Tet, what's called Perek Tet, right? Chapter 9 of Sefer Bamidbar. The Prakim are not part of our Musarah, but we just use them for convenience. But chapter 9, Parashat Ba'alotcha, the Torah tells us, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'shana hashenit letzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon lemor. And the date here is going to be very significant. We'll get back to that in a moment. But the Torah tells us, Hashem spoke to Moshe in Midbar Sinai. When does this take place? B'shana Shenit, so in the second year, Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and other places, the whole discussion, exactly when do we start counting the year from? But this is the second year of going out. If we start counting the years from Nisan, from when Yetziat Mitzrayim took place. So let's say Tam Eretz Mitzrayim, B'chodesh Harishon Lemor. So this is taking place now in the first month of the second year. So this is in Nisan. This is a year after we've left Egypt. Now, why am I going on so much about the dates and where it is? Because if you go back to the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, the very first pasuk, we notice something interesting. So we go back right 9 chapters earlier or 8 chapters earlier, and when does Sefer Bamidbar start? We'd expect that it starts before we get to Parashat Ba'alotcha. But Bamidbar begins, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'oel moed Be'echad lachodesh hasheni, b'shana hashenit letzeitam mitzrayim, me'eretz Mitzrayim. Right. So Sefer Bamidbar opens up, and we go back to Perek Aleph. This is in the second month of the second year. Right. We can't get confused here. The Torah is very explicit in terms of when this is taking place. So this is the second month, which is Iyar of the second year. That's where Sefer Bamidbar begins. Now we get to Parashat Ba'alotcha, and we're talking about a story which took place in the first month in the second year. So this was earlier. So over here, everybody's going to agree. Rashi mentions we have the principle of Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar b'Torah. The Torah is not necessarily written in chronological order. Right? Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's a big machloket amongst the Rishonim how far we can use this rule, how far we can extend it. There are those like Rashi who are more comfortable with using Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar b'Torah, even where maybe it's not strictly necessary. Other Rishonim will say, no, if there's any way to explain the Pshat according to the chronological order, we'll do that. Only if we absolutely have to say that it's not in order will we invoke that rule, and the Ramban, Barbanel, and others. But here, this is one of the places where you have no choice. The Torah tells us explicitly when these things took place. So that's the first thing already raises question marks. Why suddenly we come to Parashat Ba'alotcha, we start reading the story, and we say, Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar b'Torah. Why didn't we hear about this earlier? Why didn't Bamidbar start over here and not over there? I'll tell you a story about Mukdam u'Meuchar. Yesterday was a friend of mine told me he went on a trip to America, and he got to the place where he was. He needed to rent a car, and he gives over his license for renting the car. They say to him, your driver's license is expired. So he says, what are you talking? Last week he was driving on this license in Israel. I'll show you. He keeps the law. It had not expired. So he says, what are you talking about? So they say they look on the license there's a code. It's got all the things. It's got the date. He says, you see this date over here? It says 2019. Your license expired 4 years ago. He says, that's the date of issue. The guy says, no. I've got the key here from Israel explaining, where the date. That's the date of issue. That's the expiry date. He says, okay, so where's the date of issue? He points over there. He says 2029. He says, you understand that 2019 comes before 2029. You're telling me, no, this is what it says on the piece of paper. This is the way it has to be. I said to him, this is so you can see, but this is so maybe that was like the Machloket Rishonim, right? Where do we say? But we only invoke this principle of Ein Mukdam U'Ma'achar, according to some, when it's absolutely necessary. As we said, here it's absolutely necessary. So we'll come back to it and we'll see why. Everybody will agree. And even if we extend it to other cases, if the Torah wrote things out of order, there's a reason it wrote things out of order. There's got to be something that wants to teach us. Okay. So the story continues. Remember, we're now in Chodesh HaRishon. So we're in Nisan. Okay, very good. And this is really the only time after the original Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim that we're told that Bnei Israel Asur et HaPesach. On the 14th, right? You will do it at its appointed time. Do it exactly according to what its laws, what its chukim, what its mishpatim, as is required. Right. So until now, Hashem has given the command to Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Bnei Israel, and they bring it. All is good. Continues the Torah. A lot of repetition, right? But they did it. They did exactly as they'd been commanded. On the 14th day, they brought the Korban Pesach. And then, there were certain individuals who were tamei. They could not bring the Pesach on that day. So they approached, they came close to Moshe and to Aaron on that day. And these people didn't tell us who they are or why, but they said, we are tamei, we've come into contact with the corpse. Why should we be excluded? Why should we be left out? Why should I write the word nigara comes from the root of ra, which means something bad, but also just like we have a mitzvah about tosif, about tigra. Don't add on a mitzvah, don't subtract a mitzvah. Why should we be subtracted? Why should we not have the opportunity to bring this korban? Why should we not be able to bring it at its appointed time? And again, at this point, we think the answer is obvious. You should be excluded because you said it yourself. You were tamei. You couldn't do it. Okay, you're patur, but that's it. Vayomer alehem Moshe, amazing answer. Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Imdu, stand here, wait here. Ve'eshma'a ma yitzaveh Hashem lachem. Let me go and consult. Let me go and consult with the Kadosh Baruch. Okay, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu say? We all know the answer. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem says Moshe saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael lemor. If it should happen that there should be somebody who is tamei or who is far away, lachem or ledorotechem, meaning this is not just for you, for these people now. This is ledorotechem. This is always. V'asa Pesach l'Hashem. You'll be able to do the Pesach, to bring the Korban Pesach, the Chodesh HaSheni, in the second month in a year. The dates we're beginning now. V'abasa yom ben arbaim yasoto al matzot u'morim yochlu. So that is the story, right? Amazing story. We have many places in Chumash again where there are questions and things, and people come to Moshe Rabbeinu, they ask him, he tells them the answer. Person missed out, they left out for some whatever reason. Yeah, they come and they say Lama Nigara. By the way, it's not the only place. Not Tzlofchad, right? We have the same word. The Torah says over there, right, of that root of Lama Nigara. Why should we be left out? In that case, why should our father's name be left out from the portion in Eretz Yisrael? And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, you get it, you get the answer. But so again, I want to go back to the beginning of this story, and again, the date, which, as we mentioned, is not is out of chronological order. And Rashi points out, he says to us, why is it that the Chumash of Bamidbar did not begin here, but it began with Bamidbar, right? So says Rashi like this. He says, B'chodesh HaRishon, parasha shebalosh hasefer lo ne'emar ad yiyah. The parasha which begins Chumash Bamidbar is only, as we saw, in the second month. That wasn't said until Iyah. So lamatta she'en seder mukdam u'mauchar b'Torah, and therefore we understand this is proof that the Torah is not necessarily written in chronological order. Okay, v'lama lo patach bezu. So why not? Why should you not? Why should it not begin over here? Mipnei shehi gnutan shel Yisrael. Because if you were to start with this is the gnut of Israel. This is a disgrace. This is disparaging to Bnei Israel. Because for the entire 40 years in which they were in the desert, only once did they actually bring the Korban Pesach. Only in this year, in the second year. The rest of the time, they did not. And therefore, it would be gnut, says Rashi. If we begin, it tells us the story. Certain things doesn't tell us, or here it's told. It's not hidden because it happened, but it doesn't want to call attention to it. If we begin in the beginning of the Sefer, the beginning of Chumash opens up with the story of Pesach, and then the story of Pesach Sheni, and then the fact that we begin Chumash Bamidbar with the Korban Pesach, we'll all ask ourselves, well, what happened? Wait a minute, why was this the only time? It's hidden in the middle in Parshat Ba'alotcha. By that point, people are falling asleep, they're not paying attention, whatever it is. Okay, but it's not as obvious, it's not as explicit. How does the Chumash begin? Very, very interestingly. If you remember the first Rashi on Bamidbar, which talks about the census, talks about counting, says Rashi, mitoch chibatan nefanav moneh otam kol sha'ah. Because of the chibah, because of the love, because of how precious Bnei Israel are in the eyes of Hashem, so he counts them. Somebody pointed out once, if you go through each of the 5 Chumashim, 4 of the 5, you look at the first Rashi on every Chumash, it talks about chibah, he talks about kavod, talks about respect, it talks about chibah, this love. We open up on a positive note, talking about that the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. We don't open up on a negative note of the fact that they did not fulfill the mitzvot that they were meant. But the obvious question here is, right? Rashi says it's gnut. It's gnut that they did not fulfill, they did not perform the Korban Pesach throughout the years in the Midbar. So the Rishonim ask a number of questions on this, and basically from two directions. One direction is, who says that they were meant to bring the Korban Pesach when they were in the Midbar? It points out that the Torah itself actually tells us in the pasuk which comes in Parshat Bo, it tells us, it connects the idea of Pesach Dorot, of bringing the Korban Pesach to being in the land of Israel, to being in the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, when they were not there and they were in the Midbar, this Korban Pesach was a horat shah that they had to bring it now. This was an exception, but they were not actually required to bring it the rest of the time. That is one approach. It's one question the Rishonim ask. Another question, because even if you were to say that they were required to bring it, well, we know there are certain preconditions. In order to bring the Korban Pesach, all the males of one's household have to have undergone Brit Milah. But in the Midbar, they did not perform Brit Milah. The Gemara in Yevamot explains, says it was a sakana. It wasn't safe. For whatever reason, they were unable to do it. So they were patur. In a sense, patur, kol anus, whatever reason they were unable to. So why do we say that is a gnut? Why do we call it disparaging the fact that they were unable to bring it all those 40 years? So 2 quick answers. One, which is brought by Tosfot, brought by the Chizkuni, brought by a number of the Rishonim, is the following. What the gnut is, that who says they were meant to be in the Midbar for 40 years in the first place? Remember, we're so used to it that we know the story, but we forget. They came out of Mitzrayim. They were meant to be a few days, were meant to come along and go into Eretz Yisrael. Later on, in Parshat Ba'alotcha, Rashi points out, when Moshe Rabbeinu says to Yitro, says, we're traveling to, right? Right, Od Shlosha Yamim, says Rashi, and by three more days we'll be in Eretz Yisrael. Longest 3 days in history, right? But so it took 40 years. So says the Chizkuni, says the Tosfot, the Gnut of, yes, you're right. While they were there and they were in the Midbar, maybe they weren't commanded, or they were exempt, or they weren't able to. But the fact that they were in the Midbar in the first place was because of the whole episode of the Meraglim. Was because of the fact that was a punishment. They had to stay there for 40 years. That's the Gnut. And that's the problem. That is one approach. We don't want to call attention to that, certainly not at the beginning of the set. That is the approach of Tosfot. Another approach, the Maharal, in Gur Aryeh, and Lubavitcher Rebbe builds on this. He says, the Maharal says that when you have a mitzvah that you're meant to fulfill and you're meant to perform, so a person is anus, a person has, for whatever extenuating circumstances, he's unable to perform. So he certainly won't be punished. But you would have been better off if you'd done the mitzvah. The fact is, you won't be punished, you won't lose points for it, but you didn't do the mitzvah. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah. You can't, all Onis Rachmana Patre means that you're exempt from the punishment, you're exempt from the consequences. But it's not as if you've done it, because you haven't done it. So he says, nonetheless, there'd still be a gnut. And says the Rebbe Milubavitch, now we can understand why this parsha, why this lesson is taught b'samuch to Pesach Sheni. Because what is Pesach Sheni all about? Pesach Sheni is these people came along and they said, Lama nigara, why should we be left out? But you were anos, you were patur, you were exempt, you didn't have to do it. For whatever reason, Korban Pesach, this mitzvah, time to go into now, but this is different to other mitzvot. But when we don't have the opportunity, or when we lose the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah, what's our reaction? Is our reaction, oh good, we don't have to do it? What's our reaction? Why not? Okay, I won't be punished, I won't whatever, but I want to do it. We've got that drive, we've got that passion. They want to come close to Hashem in whatever way they can, legitimately within the framework of halacha. So they say, provide us that outlet within the framework of halacha in order to be able to do this. They came and they asked him. So if a few individuals came along and said, why should we be left out? Why can't we have Pesach? And Hashem said, fine, you can have Pesach Sheni. So imagine if the whole nation had come and said, we're not going to be able to do this. Why should we lose out? The fact they didn't care enough to come forward and ask. He says, that's the gnut. So they're going to learn the lesson from that. We should always have that passion, have that drive, and try and look for those opportunities for our mitzvah to fulfill halacha. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael. לפיכך בלהם תורה מצוות שנאמר, חפץ מען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידע.